So welcome back to the BFG by Roald Dahl, read by Mr. Mike. And we left off yesterday finding all about the giants and the great plan. So we're going to carry on now with looking at what is going to happen next. So sit back with your book if you're going to follow the story with me, or if you're just going to listen, get comfy and let's find out all about mixing the dream. It was dark now. The night had already begun. The BFG, with Sophie sitting on his hand, hurried into the cave and put on those brilliant blinding lights that seemed to come from nowhere. He placed Sophie on the table. "Stay there, please," he said, "and no chittering. I is needing to listen to silence when I is mixing up such a knotty plexicated dream as this." He hurried away from her. He got out an enormous empty jar that was the size of a washing machine. He clutched it tightly to his chest and hurried towards the shelves on which stood the thousands and thousands of smaller jars containing the captured dreams. "Dreams about giants," he muttered to himself as he searched labels. "This giants is guzzling human beings. No, not that one. Nor that one. Ah, here's one. Ah, and here's another." He grabbed the jars and unscrewed the tops. He tipped the dreams into the enormous jar he was clutching, and as each one went in, Sophie caught a glimpse of a small sea-green blob tumbling from one jar into the other. The BFG hurried towards another shelf. "Now," he muttered, "I was wanting dreams about giggle houses for girls, and about boggle boxes for boys." He was becoming very tense now. Sophie could almost see the excitement bubbling inside him as he scurried back and forth amongst his beloved jars. There must have been 50,000 dreams altogether up there on the shelves, but he seemed to know almost exactly where every single one of them was. "Dreams about a little girl," he muttered, "and dreams about me, about the BFG. Come on, hurry up, get on with it. Now where in the wonky world is I keeping those dreams?" And so it went on. In about half an hour, the BFG had found all of the dreams he wanted to put into the jar and tipped them into that one big place. He put the jar on the table. Sophie sat watching him but said nothing. Inside the big jar, lying on the bottom of it, she could clearly see about 50 of those oval sea-green jellious shapes, all pulsing gently in and out, some lying on top of others, but each one still as a quite separate individual dream. "Now we're mixing them," the BFG announced. He went to the cupboard where he kept his bottles of frobscottle and from it took out one gigantic egg beater. It was one of those that has a handle which you turn, and down below there are lots of overlapping blades that go whizzing round. He inserted the bottom end of this contraption into the jar and where the dreams were lying. "Watch," he said. He started turning the handle very fast. Flashes of green and blue exploded inside the jar. "The poor thing," Sophie cried. "They is not feeling it," the BFG said as he turned the handle. "Dreams is not like human beings or animals. They has no brains. They is made of Zosimus." After about a minute, the BFG stopped whisking. The whole bottle was now full to the brim with large bubbles. They were almost exactly like the bubbles we ourselves blow with soapy water, except that these had an even brighter, more beautiful colours swimming on the surfaces. "Keep watching," the BFG said. Quite slowly, the topmost bubble rose up through the neck of the jar and floated away. A second one followed, then a third and a fourth. Soon the cave was filled with hundreds of beautiful coloured bubbles, all drifting gently through the air. It was a truly wonderful sight. As Sophie watched them, they all started floating towards the cave entrance, which was still open. "They're going out," said the BFG. "Of course," the BFG said. "Where to?" "Those is all tiny little dream bits that I isn't using," the BFG said. "They's going back to the misty country to join up with proper dreams." "Dreams is full of mystery and magic," the BFG said. "Do not try to understand them. Look in the big bottle and you will now see the dream you is wanting for your queen." Sophie turned and stared into the great jar. On the bottom of it, something was thrashing around wildly, bouncing up and down and flinging itself against the walls of the jar. "Good heavens," she cried. "Is that it?" "That's it," the BFG said proudly. But it's horrible, Sophie cried. It's jumping about. It wants to get out. That's because it's a troggle humper, the BFG said. It's a nightmare. Oh, but I don't want to give the Queen a nightmare, Sophie cried. If she is dreaming about giants guzzling up little boys and girls, then what is you expecting it to be except a nightmare, the BFG said. Oh no, Sophie cried. Oh yes, the BFG said. A dream where you are seeing little chidlers being eaten out of the most frightsome troggle humper dream you can ever get. It's a Kixie bog humper. It's a wopsy grob switcher. It is all of them riddled into one. It is as bad as that dream I blew into the flesh lump eater this afternoon. It's worse. Sophie stared down at the fearful, nightmarish dream that was still thrashing away in the huge glass jar. It was much larger than the others. It was about the size and the shape of, shall we say, a turkey's egg. It was jellyish. It had tinges of bright scarlet deep inside it. There was something terrible about the way it was throwing itself against the side of the jar. I don't want to give the Queen a nightmare, Sophie said. I was thinking, the BFG said, that your Queen will be happy to have a nightmare. If having a nightmare is going to save a lot of human beings from being gobbled up by filthsome giants. Is I right or left? I suppose you're right, Sophie said. It's got to be done. She will soon be getting over it, the BFG said. Have you put all the other important things into it? Sophie asked. When I is blowing that dream into the Queen's bedroom, she will be dreaming every single little thing-a-ling, a-ling, that you was asking me to make her dream about. About me sitting on the windowsill? That very part is strong. About a big friendly giant? Oh, I was putting in a nice long gobbet about him, the BFG said. As he spoke, he picked up one of his smaller jars and very quickly tipped the struggling, thrashing troggle humper out the jar into the small one. Then he screwed the lid tightly onto the small jar. That's it, he announced. We is now ready. He fetched his suitcase and put the small jar into it. Why bother to take a great big suitcase when you've only got one, Sophie said. You could put the jar in your pocket. The BFG looked down at her and smiled. By goggles, he said, taking the jar out of the suitcase. Your head is not quite so full of grim sludge after all. I can see you is not born last week. Thank you, kind sir, Sophie said, making a little curtsy from the tabletop. Is you ready to leave? I'm ready, Sophie cried. Her heart was beginning to thump at the thought of what they were about to do. It was really, really wild and crazy thing to do. Perhaps they would be thrown into prison. The BFG was putting his great black cloak on. He tucked the jar into a pocket in his cloak. He picked up his long trumpet-like dream blower. Then he turned and looked at Sophie. The dream bottle is in my pocket, he said. Is you going to sit there with it while we travel? Oh, never. I refuse to sit next to that beastly thing. Then where is you going to sit? And she said, if you would be so kind enough to swivel one of your lovely big ears so it's lying flat like a dish, that would be a very, very cosy place for me to sit. By gumbo, that's a squawkling good idea, said the BFG. I hope I don't fall down your ear hole, though, Sophie said, edging away from the large hole that's just behind her. Be very careful not to do that. You would be giving me a cronking earache. Nice thing about being there was that she could whisper directly into his ear. You was tickling me a bit, the BFG said. Please do not jiggle about. Oh, I'll try not to. Are you ready? Don't talk too loud, Sophie. You was forgetting that I was hearing every little thingling 50 times louder than usual, and there you is shouting right away inside my ear. Oh gosh, Sophie murmured. I totally forgot that. Your voices sound like thunder and trumpets. I'm so sorry, whispered Sophie. Is that better? No, cried the BFG. It sounds like you was shooting off a blunderbuss. Then how can I talk to you? Sophie whispered. Don't talk, cried the BFG. Please don't. Each word is like you dropping buzz bombs in my ear hole. Sophie tried speaking right under her breath. Is this better? She said. She spoke so softly she couldn't even hear her own voice. That's better, the BFG said. Now I is hearing you nicely. I was saying, are we ready? We is off, cried the BFG, heading to the cave entrance. We is off to meet Her Majesty, the Queen. Outside the cave, he rolled the large stone back into place and set off at a tremendous gallop. The journey to London. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight as the big friendly giant went galloping across it. Sophie, still wearing only her nightie, was reclining comfortably in a crevice of the BFG's right ear. She was actually in the outer rim of the ear, near the top, where the edge of the ear folds over, and this folding over bit made a sort of roof for her and gave her wonderful protection against the rushing wind. What's more, she was lying on skin that was soft and warm and almost velvety. Nobody, she told herself, had ever travelled in such comfort. Sophie peered over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of giant country go whizzing by. They were certainly moving quite fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though they were rockets shooting up in the air. Sophie had not slept for such a long time, and she was very tired. She was also warm and comfortable, and so she dozed off. Suddenly, without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharply to the left. For the first time during the entire journey, he spoke a few words. "Look, quick, quick, over there," he said, pointing his long trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction it was pointing. Through the murky darkness, all she saw at first was a great cloud of dust about 300 yards away. "Those is the other giants, they're all galloping back home after their guzzle," said the BFG. And Sophie saw them in the light of the moon. She saw all 9 of those monstrous half-naked brutes. They were galloping back in their pack, their necks looking forwards, arms bent at the elbow, worst of all their tummies bulging. "A lot of little girlsies and boysies is no longer sleeping in their beds tonight," the BFG said. Sophie felt quite ill. But this grim encounter made her more determined than ever to go through with her mission. It must have been about an hour or so later that the BFG began to slow his pace. "We is in England now," he said suddenly. Dark though it was, Sophie could see that they were in a country of green fields, neat hedges, and in between fields. "We is coming close to London," said the BFG. He slowed down to a trot. He began looking around cautiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides of him. But there were still no lights in the windows. It was too early for anybody to be getting up yet. "Someone's bound to see us," Sophie said. "Never is they seeing me," said the BFG confidently. "You was forgetting that I was doing this sort of thing for years and years and years. No human being is ever catching the smallest wink of me." "I did," Sophie said. Yeah, but you're the very first," said the BFG. During the next half hour, things moved so swiftly and silently that Sophie, crouching in the giant's ear again, was unable to understand exactly what was going on. They were in the streets, there were houses everywhere, sometimes there were shops, there were bright lamps in the streets, there were quite a few people about, and there were cars and with their lights on. But nobody ever noticed the BFG. It was impossible to understand quite how he did it. There was a kind of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt into the shadows. He would glide. That was the only way to describe his way of moving. He would glide noiselessly from one dark place to another, always moving, always gliding forwards through the streets of London. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There was a road running through it and a lake. There were no people in this place, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they had set out from his cave many hours earlier. "What's the matter?" "I is in a bit of a puddle." "But you're doing marvellously." "No, I isn't. I is now completely boggled. I is lost." "But why?" "Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures." "Don't be silly," Sophie whispered. "This is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where we are." "You is joking." "I'm not. I swear I'm not. We're almost there." "You mean we is near the Queen's Palace?" cried the BFG. "It's just across the road," Sophie whispered. "This is where I take over." "Which way?" the BFG asked. "Straight ahead." The BFG trotted forwards through the deserted park. "Now stop." The BFG stopped. "You see that huge roundabout ahead of us, just outside that park?" "I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner." Even now, when it's still an hour before dawn, there was quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park Corner. Then Sophie whispered, In the middle of the roundabout, there's an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse and a rider on top of it. Can you see it? I is seeing it, he said. Do you think you can, if you took a very fast run at it, you could jump clear over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch and over the horse and the rider and land on the pavement on the other side? Easy, the BFG said. You sure? Absolutely sure? I promise, the BFG said. Whatever you do, you mustn't land in the middle of Hyde Park Corner. The BFG broke into a full gallop. He went scorching across the park, and just before he reached the railings that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew over Hyde Park Corner and landed as softly as a cat on the pavement on the other side. Well done, Sophie whispered. Now quick, over the wall. We're there, Sophie whispered excitedly. We're in the Queen's back garden. The palace. By gumdrops, whispered the big friendly giant. Is this really it? There's the palace, Sophie whispered back. Not more than 100 yards away, through the tall trees in the garden, across the mown lawns and the tidy flower beds, the massive shape of the palace itself loomed through the darkness. It was made of whitish stone. The sheer size of it staggered the BFG. But this place is having 100 bedrooms at least, he said. Easily, I should think, Sophie whispered. Then eyes boggled, the BFG said. How is I possibly finding the one where the Queen is sleeping? Let's go a bit closer and have a look, Sophie whispered. The BFG glided forwards among the trees. The great ear in which Sophie was sitting began to swivel around. Hey, Sophie whispered, you're going to tip me out. Shh, the BFG whispered back. He's hearing something. He stopped behind a clump of bushes. He waited. The BFG pointed through a gap in the bushes, and there, not more than 50 yards away, he saw a man padding softly across the lawn. He had a guard dog with him, and it was on a leash. The BFG stayed as still as stone. So did Sophie. The man and the dog walked on past and disappeared into the darkness. Whew, you're telling me there's no soldiers at the back garden? He wasn't a soldier, Sophie whispered. He was some sort of watchman. We'll have to be careful. I was not too worried. These waxy big ears of mine is picking up even the noise of a man breathing on the other side of this garden. How much longer before it begins to get light? Sophie whispered. Very short, the BFG said. We must go pell-mell for leather now. Glided forwards through the vast garden, and once again Sophie noticed how he seemed to melt into the shadows wherever he went. His feet made no sound at all, even when he was walking on gravel. The BFG stopped and put his other ear, the one Sophie wasn't sitting in, close to a window at the palace. Nope, he whispered. What are you listening for? Sophie whispered back. I'm listening for breathing, the BFG said. I was able to tell if it's a man, human being, or a lady by the breathing voice. We has a man in there, snortling a little bit as well, he is. He glided on, flattening his tall, thin, black cloaked body against the side of the building. He came to the next window. No, he moved on. This room's empty, he whispered. He listened to several more windows, but at each one he shook his head and moved on. When he came to the window at the very centre of the palace, he listened but did not move. Ooh, we has a lady sleeping in there. Sophie felt a little quiver go running down her spine. But who? She whispered back. The BFG put a finger to his lips for silence. He reached up through the open window and parted the curtains ever so slightly. The orange glow from the night sky over London crept into the room and cast a glimmer of light onto its walls. It was a large room, oh, a lovely room, a rich carpet, golden chairs, a dressing table, a bed, and on the pillow of the bed lay the head of a sleeping lady. Sophie suddenly found herself looking at a face she had seen on stamps and coins and in newspapers all her life. For a few seconds she was speechless. Is that her? The BFG whispered. Yes, Sophie was back. The BFG wasted no time. First, and then very carefully, he started to raise the lower half of the large window down. The BFG was an expert on windows. He'd opened 1,000 of them before and to blow his dreams into bedrooms, so he never made a noise, even if they were creaky. Next, he closed the crack in the curtains. Then, with finger and thumb, he lifted Sophie out of his ear and placed her on the window ledge with her legs dangling just inside the room. Now, don't you go tip-toppling backwards, the BFG whispered. You must always be holding on tight with both hands on the inside of the window ledge. Sophie did as he said. It was summertime in London and the night was not cold, but don't forget, Sophie was still only wearing her nightie. She would have given anything for a dressing gown. The BFG was taking the glass lid from the glass jar from the pocket of his cloak. He unscrewed the lid. Now, very cautiously, he poured the precious dream into the wide end of his trumpet. He steered the trumpet through the curtains, far into the room, aiming at the place he knew the bed to be. He took a deep breath. He puffed out his cheeks and blew. Now he was withdrawing the trumpet, sliding out very, very carefully, like a thermometer. Is you all right sitting there? He whispered. Yes, Sophie murmured. She was quite terrified, but determined not to show it. She looked down over her shoulder. The ground seemed miles away, and it was a nasty drop. How long will the dream take to work? Sophie whispered. Some takes an hour, some is quicker, some is slower, but it's sure to find her in the end. Sophie said nothing. I is going off to wait in the garden, the BFG whispered. When you is wanting me, just call out my name and I is coming very quick. Will you hear me? Sophie whispered. You was forgetting these, the BFG whispered, smiling and pointing to his great big ears. Goodbye, Sophie whispered. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the BFG leaned forward and kissed her gently on the cheek. Sophie felt like crying. When she turned to look at him, he was already gone. He had simply melted away into the darkness of the garden. So we're going to leave our reading there for now. Join me again tomorrow as we learn a little bit more about the Queen and the royal breakfast. Bye for now.